April 29, 1965. A squadron of A-4 Skyhawks roars off the deck of USS Ranger and hurtles towards the North Vietnamese coast, their metal skins glinting in the morning sun. They are on the latest mission of the bombing campaign that started nearly 2 months ago, Operation Rolling Thunder. The aircrews are acutely aware of their restrictions. Hanoi and Haiphong remain off-limits, a controversial decision by the politicians back in Washington to avoid provoking Soviet and Chinese intervention. Suddenly, a fuzzy warning comes blaring over the radio. The rumors are true. The North Vietnamese have acquired Soviet SA-2 surface-to-air missiles. As trails of smoke streak through the sky around them, it's clear that the enemy is determined to give this war everything they've got. Banking hard to evade the missiles, the American pilots spot a menacing squadron of MiGs looming on the horizon. This war won't be the easy victory they had hoped for. What the White House had planned to be a quick campaign to prompt a swift diplomatic resolution is morphing into a complex, grueling battle of wits and will. In early 1965, U.S. military leaders faced a dilemma in Vietnam. Limited airstrikes, including Operation Flaming Dart, failed to deter North Vietnamese aggression. Air Force Chief of Staff General Curtis LeMay and others advocated for a comprehensive air campaign, believing sustained bombing could cripple North Vietnam's support for the Southern insurgency. Air Force and Navy pilots, veterans of Korea and Cold War tensions, were eager to prove American air power's might. With advanced aircraft like the F-105 Thunder Chief and A-4 Skyhawk at their disposal, they believed they could swiftly bring North Vietnam to its knees. On March 2, 1965, President Johnson and Secretary McNamara launched Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign. However, it came with frustrating restrictions for military commanders. Rolling Thunder was not the all-out assault pilots had envisioned. Johnson and McNamara opted for gradual escalation, viewing bombs as political tools rather than purely military weapons. This contrasted sharply with the military's preferred shock and awe strategy. The aircrews found themselves caught in a web of strict guidelines. Washington had drawn invisible lines across the Vietnamese landscape, marking some areas as untouchable. Pilots followed rigid flight paths, their options limited by concerns far removed from the realities of aerial combat. Even obvious military targets sometimes had to be ignored, all in an effort to avoid wider conflict. These restrictions left many feeling they were fighting with one hand tied behind their backs, a sentiment that would intensify as the campaign progressed. On March 2, 1965, the skies over Southeast Asia reverberated with the thunderous roar of jet engines as Operation Rolling Thunder commenced. Squadrons of sleek Thunder Chiefs and agile Skyhawks streaked across the dawn sky, on their way to North Vietnam, their pilots' hearts racing with excitement and adrenaline. The first wave of aircraft approached their targets. F-105 swooped low over a sprawling army barracks, their bomb bays yawning open to release a devastating payload. Explosions blossomed across the compound, sending plumes of smoke billowing into the air. Meanwhile, A-4 Skyhawks screamed towards supply depots, their wings laden with rockets and bombs. A crucial focus of these initial strikes was the infamous Ho Chi Minh Trail, a complex network of jungle paths and roads that served as North Vietnam's lifeline for moving troops and supplies southward. Flights of aircraft crisscrossed the dense jungle canopy, searching for telltale signs of enemy activity. Bombs fell, cratering roads and collapsing tunnel entrances in an attempt to sever this vital artery. As the pilots returned to base, flushed with the adrenaline of their first missions, a sense of accomplishment permeated the debriefing rooms. However, this initial euphoria soon gave way to frustration. The lack of follow-up strikes allowed the North Vietnamese to quickly repair damage and adapt to the bombing patterns. Reconnaissance photos revealed a resilient enemy, with cratered roads swiftly filled and bomb structures eerily resurrected. The limitations of American equipment and tactics became painfully apparent. Many bombs missed their marks due to the absence of precision-guided munitions, while early warning systems proved inadequate against the rapidly growing North Vietnamese air defense network. pilots found themselves flying armed reconnaissance missions, seeking out targets of opportunity rather than striking pre-planned strategic objectives. Moreover, political considerations cast a long shadow over the operation. The Ho Chi Minh Trail's path through Laos and Cambodia presented a diplomatic minefield, limiting the ability to strike certain sections. This cautious approach allowed the North Vietnamese precious time to adapt and prepare, diminishing the psychological impact of the bombing campaign. Meanwhile, the skies themselves became more dangerous once the North Vietnamese Air Force entered the fray. Initially fielding just 53 MiG-17 fighters against a much larger and more technologically advanced U.S. force, the North Vietnamese quickly proved that it could use surprise attacks to gain the upper hand. The agile MiGs would materialize seemingly out of nowhere from behind cloud cover or burst up from the jungle canopy and swoop in at high speeds, cannons rattling, and then banking sharply away before American pilots could effectively respond. The MiG's superior maneuverability allowed them to turn inside the larger American fighters, often appearing suddenly on their tails in a lethal position. In response to this unanticipated threat, U.S. aviators developed the Fluid 4 formation. Two pairs of aircraft would weave in a constant, graceful pattern, each watching the other's vulnerable areas. This intricate dance allowed for better mutual support and visibility, giving pilots crucial seconds to alert their wingmen of approaching danger. Despite these adaptations, the sky remained a perilous place. Many U.S. pilots, more accustomed to flying high-altitude nuclear strike profiles, found themselves thrust into twisting, turning dogfights at treetop level. The F-4 Phantom II, for all its power and speed, revealed a critical weakness in these swirling, close-range encounters. Without an internal cannon, F-4 pilots were often rendered helpless when enemies slipped too close for their missiles to be effective, watching in frustration as MiGs escaped their gun sights. As days turned to weeks, the initial excitement of Rolling Thunder gave way to a sobering reality, as it became clear it would be a protracted, complex battle against an enemy far more resilient and resourceful than anyone had imagined. In June 1965, the first phase of Rolling Thunder was brought to a close, and the following month, the second phase began. This time, U.S. pilots saw their target list expand to include larger pieces of infrastructure. Bridges, major roads, and transportation hubs now came under attack, but once again, results were decidedly mixed. One particular symbol of the pilots' frustration was the Paul Doomer Bridge, a mile-long railroad and highway bridge spanning the Red River near Hanoi. Despite repeated attacks, the bridge remained standing, with North Vietnamese repair crews working tirelessly to keep it operational. To make matters worse, a new threat to American aviators emerged on July 24, 1965. A squadron of F-4C Phantoms was streaking towards its target when a thin trail of white smoke suddenly erupted from the jungle below, rapidly climbing toward the formation. The Phantoms broke apart, diving and jinking in evasive maneuvers. But for one aircraft, it was too late. Torn apart in a fiery explosion, it had been hit by an SA-2 surface-to-air missile, or SAM, provided to North Vietnam by the Soviets. As parachutes blossomed in the sky, the surviving pilots watched in horror, realizing the air war had entered a new stage. In response to the SAM threat, the Air Force rapidly developed the Wild Weasel program. F-100F Super Sabres and later F-105 Thunder Chiefs were retrofitted with specialized electronic detection equipment. These aircraft prowled the skies of North Vietnam, their crews scanning for the telltale electronic emissions of enemy radar systems. Wild Weasel missions epitomize the concept of trolling for trouble. Flying ahead of the main strike force, they deliberately provoked enemy air defenses into activating their radar, thereby exposing their positions. As SAM sites came to life, Wild Weasel crews would swoop in, launching anti-radiation missiles that homed in on the radar emissions while dodging a hail of anti-aircraft fire. On March 10, 1967, Captain Merlin Hans Dethlefsen exemplified the Wild Weasel ethos during a mission over the Tai Nguyen Steelworks. After his flight leader was shot down, Dethlefsen continued to attack enemy defenses for over an hour, despite damage to his own aircraft. He repeatedly flew through intense flak to destroy 2 SAM sites and an anti-aircraft gun position, ensuring the safety of the following strike force. Just over a month later, on April 19th, Major Leo K. Thorsness demonstrated similar valor. During a so-called Iron Hand mission to attack enemy air defenses, Thorsness destroyed 2 SAM sites and then drew several MiGs away from a rescue operation for a downed aircrew. Low on fuel, he still managed to damage another MiG and suppress additional SAM sites before limping back to base on fumes. Yet, despite the technological prowess and individual heroism of American aircrews, the North Vietnamese air defense network proved remarkably resilient. SAM sites, once destroyed, would often be rebuilt or relocated within days, ensuring that each mission remained as perilous as the last. With the first 2 phases having proven ineffective, as 1966 began, the U.S. decided it was time for a shift of focus. Recalling a strategy applied to devastating effect in World War II, the 3rd phase would target petroleum, oil, and lubricant storage facilities in a bid to leave the enemy without key resources. This new stage saw an intensification of the air war as both sides continued to innovate. The North Vietnamese acquired the more advanced MiG-21, providing an even greater challenge to U.S. air superiority. With some operating from bases in China, beyond the reach of American bombs, these fighters could strike and then quickly retreat to safety. Meanwhile, as dogfights became increasingly common, the U.S. also sought an upgrade with the development of the F-4E variant of the Phantom II, which incorporated an internal M61 Vulcan cannon to address the issues faced by its predecessors in air-to-air combat. Nevertheless, while these bolstered capabilities may have helped take on aerial threats, they offered little to protect pilots from an increasingly sophisticated enemy air defense system. What had started as a collection of around 1,500 light anti-aircraft guns had grown within a year to over 5,000 weapons, including radar-directed 85mm and 100mm guns. This dense network of anti-aircraft artillery created a lethal environment for American pilots, particularly as they were forced to fly at lower altitudes to avoid SAMs. In terms of mission success, U.S. Air Force and Navy pilots would once again be left disappointed. They soon discovered that the North Vietnamese had anticipated such attacks and dispersed their fuel reserves in small caches across the country, minimizing the impact of the strikes. By October 1966, the U.S. had accepted the failure of the 3rd phase and opted for another change of target. This time, Air Force and Navy bombers were to hit key industrial facilities and power plants. On December 13th, even the skies over Hanoi, previously off-limits, filled with the roar of American jets. Waves of F-105s and F-4s streaked across the city, releasing their payloads. Explosions rocked the capital, pillars of smoke rising from the intended military targets. But amid the chaos, some bombs strayed off course. The ground shook as blasts erupted in residential areas, reducing homes to rubble and sending civilians scrambling for shelter. The attacks continued the next day, leaving parts of Hanoi in ruins. As international news crews broadcast images of the devastation, the world reacted with shock and condemnation. U.S. military officials staunchly defended the raids, insisting their pilots had strictly adhered to designated military targets. Yet, the smoke rising from Hanoi's neighborhoods told a different story, one that laid bare the risks of escalation and the blurred lines between military and civilian targets in this complex air campaign. In May 1967, Rolling Thunder entered its 5th phase. American pilots now hunted for fleeting targets of opportunity: supply trucks rumbling down jungle roads, camouflaged fuel depots, and mobile SAM sites that would appear and disappear like ghosts. However, this was disrupted in January 1968 when the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong launched the Tet Offensive. Across South Vietnam, from Saigon to Hue, communist forces struck in a coordinated assault that caught U.S. forces off guard. As battles raged in the streets of South Vietnamese cities, many Rolling Thunder missions were abruptly canceled. Air Force and Navy pilots were redirected to close air support missions, their bombs now falling on enemy positions just yards from beleaguered American and South Vietnamese troops. The skies over North Vietnam, once filled with the constant drone of American aircraft, fell eerily quiet as the focus shifted southward. Although the Tet Offensive would ultimately fail militarily, its psychological impact was profound, marking a turning point in the war and casting a long shadow over the future of the Rolling Thunder campaign. On March 31, 1968, President Johnson announced a partial bombing halt north of the 20th parallel, a decision that caught many in the Air Force and Navy off guard. This effectively ended the main phase of Operation Rolling Thunder, much to the frustration of military leaders who believed they were on the verge of breaking the enemy's will. The final Rolling Thunder mission was flown on October 31, 1968. As the last aircraft touched down, pilots and commanders alike reflected on a transformed battlefield. What had begun as a supposedly straightforward display of American air power had evolved into a complex, lethal contest that had pushed both men and machines to their limits. Operation Rolling Thunder's failure prompted significant soul-searching within the U.S. military. The gradual escalation strategy came under particular criticism from those who had advocated for a more intensive campaign from the start. Many, like Air Force Colonel Jack Broughton, lamented that they were, quote, not allowed to win. Despite its shortcomings, Operation Rolling Thunder spurred significant advancements in military aviation. The conflict drove the rapid expansion of electronic warfare capabilities and the development of precision-guided munitions, innovations that would prove crucial in future conflicts like the 1991 Gulf War. The Air War's challenges led to profound changes in pilot training. The U.S. Navy established the renowned Top Gun School to enhance dogfighting skills, with the Air Force eventually following suit. Operation Rolling Thunder revealed that advanced technology alone doesn't guarantee success against a determined foe. It underscored the need for clear, achievable goals and a deep understanding of the enemy. The operation's challenges, especially those stemming from political restrictions, shaped future military thinking. Strategies that emerged in later years, like the Weinberger and Powell doctrines, reflected these lessons, emphasizing well-defined objectives and decisive force.